This podcast has been made possible by Workday.
Hello, this is Laurence Capone. I'm the CFO of Pipedrive, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 855.
As we became more profitable and our balance sheet began to improve, metrics like free cash flow, cash balance, leverage ratios became critical metrics. And we developed a cash allocation policy and a model. Now we're poised. It's not going to happen this year or next year or even probably 2 or 3 years, but we're poised to become the biggest company in our business. So market share is now a very much a highlighted metric.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Jim Moylan, CFO of Ciena. Finance leader Jim Moylan is perhaps our first CFO guest to list the leasing of oil rigs as one of the experiences he feels best prepared him for a CFO role. Of course, Moylan makes clear the experience is worthy of mention not so much because of what he was selling, but the fact that he was selling at all. Selling is the best way to learn. Moylan tells us it's the best way to learn about your company, and it's the best way to understand your company's value proposition. Or so Jim Moylan explains on today's episode. We begin after this. In a world that's always changing, one thing never does. Your need to adapt, your need to evolve, your need to grow. That's why we built Workday, a single finance, HR, and planning system that can change as your needs change and evolve as the world evolves. To learn how Workday is helping mid-size organizations embrace the future with confidence, visit us at workday.com. Hello, we're speaking with Jim Moylan, CFO of Ciena. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Good to be here.
So, Jim, as you may know, we always begin with this question. We ask our guests to look back in time for us and try to identify those experiences they feel prepared them for a CFO role. Look back for us. What comes to mind?
Yes. I joined a company out of business school, an energy company. We had a number of different subsidiaries, but it was a very asset heavy and low number of people, frankly. We had $4 billion in revenue and about 3,000 people. Consequently, I was given the opportunity to do a lot of different things during my time there. I spent 22 years there. The three things that come to mind are, first of all, we had a marine contract drilling subsidiary, and I had an opportunity very early in my career to be a salesman for that subsidiary. I traveled the world trying to lease our rigs to oil companies around the world. I've always thought, and I feel this deeply, that the best way to learn what a company does and its value proposition is to be a salesperson. And having that experience as a salesperson really cemented that in my mind, and I tell people that everywhere I go. The second thing that enabled me to be a leader is that for the same company, I spent time as the head of strategy. And we did 4 acquisitions and 2 divestitures, some of which went out as IPOs. As a consequently, I learned how important strategy and strategic decisions are to a company's success. And then thirdly, I was president of an operating subsidiary. And that gave me a chance to understand how all the functions of a company integrate and how they use cross-functional communication and processes to work better. Driving that company's success was a great experience for me. So those are the things that come to my mind when I think about how I developed. I do think that it's really critical for anybody in any field to, if they want to get to the top of a company, is to have a set of diverse experiences, not just experiences within your own function.
Again, you shared with us over 20 years with that one company. Is that correct?
Yes,
And
22.
the name of the company is Sonat?
Sonat, Sonat. It's a shortening of the word Southern Natural Gas Company, because Southern Natural Gas Transmission Pipeline was the original company of the business, and it was then diversified over the years, part of which I took part in. But Southern Natural Gas Transmission Company was the company for which I was president. It was based in Birmingham, Alabama. It has since become part of it was acquired by El Paso Energy in 1999.
So 22 years with that company and with Ciena for roughly 15 years. Is that right?
Yes.
So what does that tell us about you?
I think that it is all about learning and getting to the next opportunity. I would say that between that 22-year stint and the 15-year stint at Ciena, I was with 4 different companies in about a 7 or 8 year period. So if it didn't work for me, it didn't work for me, and I learned that quickly and left. But I'd say it's all about enjoying myself, enjoying the people around me, feeling that I can make a difference and feeling that I am making a difference and developing as a leader.
I also want to share, Jim, if you wouldn't mind, way back when you were a graduate of Georgia Institute of Technology, and you go back for an MBA pretty swiftly, but you go back in a few years to Harvard, you get a Harvard MBA, and then you move in and make this connection in this for the next 2 decades. You're with that one company. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
You mentioned how you became president of one of the operating units and how you recommend varied experiences as you climb the ladder, but was it always going to be finance? Did you think I'm headed down the finance leadership path?
Well, actually, when I first went to Georgia Tech, I majored in mathematics because I had a mentor who was a great math teacher, and he guided me in that direction. I quickly found out that business was where I wanted to go. And I wasn't really sold on finance to begin with. I just knew that business was where I wanted to go. So I ended up getting an industrial engineering degree from Georgia Tech. When I went to Harvard Business School, it just became clearer and clearer to me that finance was my calling, my ultimate calling. But I do thank I'm thankful for the fact that I was able to join a company that was willing to take risks on people and put them in jobs where they weren't necessarily, sort of uh, on that path to begin with. And so as I said, I thought being the head of a company, of a subsidiary, was one of the best experiences I ever had, but also being the head of strategy and also being a salesman was just great and developed me as a financial leader. From then, as I moved up in the energy company, Sonat, my path quickly gravitated toward finance. That was where I was best and became CFO. That was my first CFO job.
Were you, in short order, were you involved in some of their M&A work, or what was the nature of your sort of expertise within your first decade, towards that end of that first decade? Where were you headed with this company? Were you someone who got involved in some of the deals or integrations, or what were you up to?
It was more in a financial planning and analysis mode. And in the early part of the deal making, I was not head of strategy. I was more or less a financial planner. and did um, the analysis, forecast, valuation work for the acquisitions. But as I became experienced in that, and as we became more acquisitive, I was moved into head of strategy. So I did actually participate in the leadership and negotiation and overall management of the deal flow. Uh, Integration, I was sort of involved in that, but that was really handled by the individual functions at the time. So once we got the deal done, at that time, I was not too active in the integration.
What's always a good question is, do you recall, was there a place in time where you had to, for the very first time, present to the executive committee? Again, your first time. Or maybe, and again, I'll let you choose what you want to share, or maybe it's even presenting to the board at one point in your life where it was the first time you were asked to do that. Was there any first time moments like that for you that you might be able to relate to us?
Yes, I'll broaden the question a little bit, and I'll start by saying this, that I was hired at Sonat by the head of corporate planning for the company. And I went to work in the contract drilling subsidiary, and I was a financial planning analyst. Eventually became the manager of that group. The head of corporate planning for the company was my first mentor. He was a master at presentations. I mean, I learned how to put together a presentation, how to make a presentation from him. And one of the things that he would focus on is enough is too much. Don't cover everything. They don't want to hear how much you know. Executives want to know what the key issues are, what data are you bringing to the questions, what your opinion is based on the data you bring. And then they'll ask whatever questions they want to ask as you move through the presentation. So, I mean, it's always a bit of a rough start for someone who is making their first couple of presentations because it is natural human tendency to want to show people everything that you know and have too much material. But I did absorb his lessons, and I do remember the first presentation I made to the board of directors. We were looking at acquiring a drilling company, and I had done all the work on it. I was not negotiating the deal, but I had done all the work. So I'd done the analysis and had done the valuation work. And of course, I was going in front of our board, which was quite scary for me. I was probably 28 at the time, 26, I don't remember. But I was nervous, and he and I were standing outside the boardroom. My mentor and I were standing outside the boardroom talking about the presentation, and he could see I was very nervous. And the door opened, and the administrative assistant said, "Okay, fellas, come on in." And my mentor looked at me, and with a smile on his face, he said, "Let's go get these guys," which I thought was perfect. It settled me down, calmed me down wonderfully. And I went in and made my presentation, and we got the approval from the board that we wanted. So that was my first experience in front of a board. And I credit my mentor with calming me down and enabling me to get through the material in a way that made sense.
You mentioned at a point in time you were president of a business unit. When do you recall you began to lead others? Was that earlier, most likely, or when did you begin to develop and have others report to you? How did that happen?
Well, I mentioned that I was hired as a financial planner in one of the subsidiaries, and the team was about 4 or 5 people. And within a year and a half, I was given responsibility to lead that group of people. So that was my first experience. I was a year and a half into my career. It was a small group, and it was a relatively simple uh, function to lead. It was not complicated. They were highly qualified people working for me. Uh, but as I moved through Sonat and became other took other positions within Sonat. I remember particularly when I became controller of the company. And as controller of the company, I had responsibility for about 100 people scattered around the U.S., not around the globe, but around the U.S. And one thing you learn when you become the leader of a larger group is that not everyone is a A-plus player. There's always going to be a need for people. Well, first of all, there's obviously a need for A-plus people. You have to have those. But you don't really want a collection of A-plus people. You want some A-plus people, and you want some really, really solid B people who are going to get their work done and provide you with the information you need to do your job. And how to select and choose your people and lead them with that knowledge is a really important lesson.
That's a great takeaway for us. Type A personalities are A people challenging in their own way.
Yeah, I've always said this, that if all your people were A people, they'd kill each other and you wouldn't have a team.
Interesting. Uh, Jim, you actually became a CFO of a number of different companies, but wondering where your exposure to the investment community and the analyst community, all of that happened.
It started at the end of my career at Sonat. I became CFO in 1997, and we sold the company in 1999. So that was my first exposure in a significant way to investor relations. I had, of course, dealt with the bond market and analysts and underwriters in the bond market prior to that. But CFO was the first time I was exposed to shareholders and investors. And our CEO was quite a good communicator with the investment community. We had quarterly meetings in New York with as many sell-siders who would attend. And so I learned from him how to begin the process. I would say that the whole process, set of techniques, and rules of the road have changed very significantly since then. As I said, as you noted, I've been CFO for a number of different companies, and I think I know how to do that pretty well. But it was really started by the fact that the CEO at the time had a very set process and a good way of dealing with the sell side and buy side analysts, and I learned from him.
So you very quickly told us that your end chapter there at Sumat, the company was actually sold. Is that right? But did you say you
Yes,
stepped into the CFO role before it was sold, or what was
yes,
okay? So
yes, I did.
that's significant. So were you you mentioned you were a controller, of course, like the global controller, I think, for
Yes,
the company. And how many steps were in between that and the CFO role?
there were 4 or 5 steps. And what happened was I became controller. I was given the uh, internal audit. I was, as part of the controllership, I was given IT as part of the controllership and tax. I then, at the end of that period of time, I had, just about all the functions of a CFO except for treasury and investor relations. Then in 94, I was named head of the pipeline subsidiary, and I did that job for 3 years until 1997. And 97 was the year that I became CFO.
And it was the company approached, or was it time to put the company up for sale? What was the circumstances that unfolded over the next 24 months?
It was a time of great change in the natural gas transmission business. There had been regulatory changes. There had been, of course, great volatility in energy prices, and there was a wave of consolidation that occurred across the natural gas transmission company business. We had other subsidiaries, but that was our major subsidiary. In the early 80s, there were probably 26 public natural gas transmission companies. By the mid 90s, there were about 7 or 8. And that quickly became 3 or 4 over the next few years. So the handwriting was on the wall. It was all about efficiencies and dealing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in a sort of an integrated way. And so it became clear that we were not of a size that we could be an acquirer. We were going to have to be an acquiree. So, I mean, it just was a strategic evolution that became clear over time.
So, Jim, you provided us with some nice overarching details about your career building years and finding your way to the CFO office originally. But right now, let's find out about Ciena. Tell us about this company. What does it do, and what are its offerings really today?
Ciena is a technology company. We produce and we sell hardware, software, and services to companies that own and operate information networks like AT&T, Verizon, Google, Facebook, Amazon. Our products attach to the network fiber and create and manage the flow of information. We use lasers and software to create information. And because light is the medium of information in a fiber network, we are known as an optical company. I would say that if you think about Porter and his sort of pillars of strategy, the thing that we do best is technology. We have leading optical technology. We've been the first to market and the best in market with all of the succeeding generations of optical technology for the last 10 years. And I believe it'll probably continue for the foreseeable future.
Take a look back for us, though, and maybe share some of the history of this company or its early milestones for us.
Yeah, I would say this, that when I joined Ciena in 2007, we were still a very young company. And we were only 10 years away from our first revenue. And so we retained a lot of the vestiges of a startup company. We were always looking for that next piece of revenue. And we had a very heavy debt load, of course, as a result of being a startup. We have matured greatly over the last 15 years. We did make a transformative acquisition in 2010, which doubled our size, quadrupled our complexity, and gave us an opportunity really to become a leader in the industry. As a result of all that, and by the way, we were below break even at the time we did the deal. We were losing money. We were barely generating cash, but we were still hanging in there, and we still had a heavy debt load. We began to focus much more on profitability metrics, gross margin, operating margin during those early years, and we showed tremendous progress in all of our profitability measures. As we became more profitable and our balance sheet began to improve, metrics like free cash flow, cash balance, leverage ratios became critical metrics. And we developed a cash allocation policy and a model. Now we're poised. It's not going to happen this year or next year or even probably 2 or 3 years, but we're poised to become the biggest company in our business. So market share is now a very much a highlighted metric. All of those financial metrics above are featured very prominently in our weekly discussion with my team. And our monthly and quarterly reports to our management, board of directors, and investors contain all of these metrics. I'd say one other metric that is very important, and it's non-financial really. It drives from the fact that uh, the key underlying driver for our business is data flows across fiber networks and then therefore demand for bandwidth. So we very carefully monitor all the statistics that we can about what's happening on networks. Uh, One of our competitors, Cisco, used to publish annually a very nice report that would give their view of what was happening. They no longer publish that report, but there are sources of data about data flows across networks, and we monitor those very carefully. The other thing I'll say that one other thing I'll say is that network providers, owners, and operators, they're mostly all public. And we also very carefully monitor their signaling and data around capital expenditures, because that's what's going to drive our business as well.
Interesting. So a lot of, watching what your competition is up to, where they're investing or not investing. At the same time, have you gotten greater ability to see into the business in some way? And maybe it's because of digital technologies, or maybe it's because of something began to be measured and looked at a little more carefully.
Well, as our um, penetration across the world and across customers, products, and applications has broadened, we now know much more about our customers than we did 15 years ago. And for example, there's always some concern out there in the market about how sustainable demand for our products is. And because we are in every major network in the world, I say that with only a little bit of exaggeration, except the Chinese telecoms, we know a lot about what's going on in their networks. And we know essentially the utilization across various aspects of their networks. That is something that gives us great confidence in the future of our business. And that's the kind of thing that we can answer the question that investors ask about the sustainability of our business.
With your roots in FP&A, really curious how over your time at Ciena, whether you've changed how you deploy your FP&A people, whether you think of them as FP&A people or you think of them a little differently. I don't know. I would imagine you do still. But I'm wondering if you've organized them differently, if you changed your practices as far as how you employ those people or appoint them to projects.
Well, what I'd say about FP&A is that I have a fantastic leader of FP&A. She actually came in as part of the acquisition that I talked about that we made in 2010, and she is a true leader in the company. One of the things that she does very well is she is able to reach out to people across the company, and she knows everything that's important to know about our business. And I would say that for an FP&A person to be successful, it is critical that he or she have those two characteristics. Number one, a deep understanding of the business, and number two, a willingness to reach out to leaders across the company and ask the kind of probing questions that are critical to being able to predict what's going to happen.
We were always trying to identify what is that skill set. What is that? It's someone who's tactful. It's someone who understands the commitments people have made. someone who understands the protocols that the company have. What am I missing?
Well, my FP&A leader has all of those, but also essential toughness, an ability to push back on people if she feels that she's not getting the answer that is the right one for the company, and to do it in a way that's tactful and doesn't raise any hackles on anybody's part. So I'd say that's a critical ability, pushing back.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's such a hard role that has to be part of the makeup. We like to always ask our signature question, which is, and this might have happened anytime during the course of your career. I don't know if you got something in mind for us, but let me just jump to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you to recall a moment of strategic insight that you had as a finance person that led you to perhaps avoid a risk, pursue an opportunity, change the course or direction of a team, whatever it may have been. Does anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I would say that it's a little broader than finance, but it came about initially quite a long time ago, in the mid 90s, when I read a book called Reengineering the Corporation, written by a guy named Michael Hammer and James Champy. And it was all about looking cross functionally across processes in a company that that need to be optimized across the company, not optimized within the function. And since I have an industrial engineering background and degree, this thought process appealed to me greatly. And I thought it was a wonderful book. I thought it was one of the best business books that's ever been written. Uh, and as a consequence, I took that set of learnings and I organized a re-engineering of the company. And we had a consultant come in and help us, of course. We didn't do it ourselves, but we came up with 5 key initiatives across the company that really made a big difference in the profitability of the company. And I was very proud to be a part of it. The reason I think it's important is that now, today, there was a lot of talk about digitalization. And what digitalization is essentially re-engineering, but using the much improved information technology systems that we have today. We have great information technology systems. Salesforce is great. It's got a world of information and can be used in a wide variety of applications. We use it. Anaplan, which is a modeling tool, which is greatly improved over past modeling tools. But those 2 systems, along with a couple or 3 homegrown systems, have enabled us to really re-engineer significant parts of Ciena and gotten us away from spreadsheets, gotten us away from repetitive work, gotten us away from manual transferal of data to a very integrated set of systems that really drive the front end of our business and our forecasting. So I'd say that's what really gave me, that book is what really gave me the sort of view about how you do not just re-engineering, but digitalization.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Jim Moylan. Re-engineering the Corporation, per Jim's reference, is an unusual book in that there are many business books that are deemed successful, but only a small fraction of them can be credited with giving birth to a transformation wave. And the re-engineering wave was a real thing in the mid to early 90s. And Re-engineering the Corporation by Michael Hammer and James Champy helped set the table, not just for one consulting firm, but the whole consulting industry for years to come. It was re-engineering projects that put the food on the table. Let's now enter the mentoring round with James Moylan. But if you can go back in time for us, that very first CFO chapter, so it would have been when you were with your CEO back in the late 90s. And when you first stepped into the CFO role and took on all the responsibilities for the first time, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, you know what you knew, you know what you might recall, what you didn't know. What would be the piece of advice you give that CFO who's there for the first 30 days of their CFO chapter?
The mistakes that I made back then were because I wasn't open-minded enough to make sure that I examined all of the aspects of whatever question was in front of me. I think it's a natural human tendency to be posed a question, to do analysis, and to come up with an answer, an opinion, or a direction. And it's also somewhat natural to kind of close yourself off to other answers and other angles. And I guess one thing I could have done better was not come up with the answer as quickly as I did, and make sure that I considered other answers, other angles, and, frankly, opposing angles to the opinions that I had. So I'd say that was what I'd give. That's the advice I would give people as they come into a early and important job. Think about all the possible answers, not just the one you think is the right idea.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side for us. Jim, this might be more related to outside of work, a little more broad. We're wondering if you have a routine, a daily routine that you do, something that this is what Jim does. That's just his way. Maybe it's a habit that you have. It might be something that a family member would point out to us. He's always done it that way. Do not know. But is there something you're known for? Something you do?
There are two things. One is that I love music, and I have of course, I'm dating myself, but I have a vast collection of LPs and CDs, and I love all kinds of music, and I listen to a lot of music of all sorts. That's what people would, my family would first point out is that he loves music. Secondly, I do have a routine, and it's been enabled, frankly, by the fact that when COVID occurred, we sent everybody home and allowed them, or forced them really, to work from home. Working from home really gives a person great flexibility. And I have used that flexibility to develop an exercise routine. I exercise just about every day. I exercise for about an hour and a half. And I can always find time in my day, or make time in my day, to exercise. And it's been great for me. And I would highly recommend it to people. You don't have to be an intense exerciser. You just have to be a regular exerciser.
Well, our next question is whether you have a book recommendation. Folks might be able to find Reengineering the Corporation on Amazon. I'm sure it's in its 17th printing. No, it was one of the most popular books of that period. So it was,
Yes,
the good to great of the early 90s. Certainly set off the whole reengineering boom that happened.
yes.
But that's an interesting selection for us. Would any other suggestions for us?
Well, you mentioned the other one I was going to say, which is Good to Great. And as good as Reengineering the Corporation was, I feel that Good to Great was the best business book that I've ever read about management and leadership. Jim Collins did a fantastic job of using data to identify the characteristics of companies and how they became good companies, how they became great companies from being merely good companies. So that's what I would highly recommend to people, because it's just great. And it's dated too. It's 2001, I think, was the publishing date, but it was a great book. I'll mention one other. It's not as well known, but it's a book called Cyber War. I've got it on my shelf here. I don't remember the author, but Cyber War is the name of it, and it is available on Amazon because I got it there. But if people don't realize what a dangerous world we have in terms of information control and intrusion of people into your network is, they should read this book, because it will be very enlightening about how so many people want to steal your information, use your information for ulterior purposes, or mess up your network. So that's the other one I'd say.
We are up to our final question, I'm afraid. This is where we get to ask you to look forward, finally. And we're wondering what your priorities are over the next 12 months as CFO of Ciena.
There's a lot of talk in the world about the supply chain. We in Ciena have experienced issues in our supply chain that have disrupted our business in ways that we could never have imagined. It's a very complicated situation. We buy something like 10,000 different SKUs for uses in our products. And we have only a handful of those, really, that have been a serious problem and have disrupted our revenue in a significant way. Our revenue for this year is well down from our plan and well down from what we communicated to the world back at the beginning of this year. We just finished our fiscal year, by the way, October 31st. So none of this is necessarily non-public information. We've communicated all this. We haven't given them the exact numbers yet, but they know. So the priority for the company and for me personally is to address this supply chain problem, fix it, and repair our image in the minds of our customers, because we have not only disrupted our business, we've disrupted their business.
Jim Moylan, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.